Yesterday, we watched Zohran Mamdani pull off what everyone thought was impossible. He didn't just win New York. He flipped it upside down overnight. But that was only the beginning. Because the moment he stepped on stage and revealed what he actually plans to do, it sent shockwaves far beyond the city limits. Within hours, Trump himself jumped in, warning that what's happening in New York could spread faster than anyone realizes. And now we're watching a collision course unfold, a radical new vision for America's biggest city, and a former president who's not about to let it happen without a fight. So today, let's dig into what Zohran really revealed, why Trump's response was immediate, and what this battle means for you and the future of America. I've watched a lot of political campaigns over the years. Some surprise you, some disappoint you, but very few genuinely shock you. Zohran Mamdani's victory in New York City, that was a shock. Not just because he won, though. Beating Cuomo by double digits is no small feat, but because of what happened the moment the cameras turned on for his victory. Speech. For months, Mamdani had been out there campaigning as the soft-spoken, reasonable democratic socialist, kind of like your polite neighbor who happens to have some unusual ideas about redistribution, but seems harmless enough. He'd smile, talk about helping working families, acknowledge his socialist leanings, but frame it all in this non-threatening, almost academic way. Then he won, and it was like watching someone take off a mask. The speech he gave that night wasn't a celebration. It was a declaration against capitalism, against the American system, against everything that made New York the financial capital of the world. He stood up there and told millions of people that the system that allowed someone like Donald Trump to accumulate wealth and power needed to be dismantled, not reformed, not adjusted, but torn down entirely. He said, the way to terrify someone like Trump is to destroy the very conditions that let him rise in the first place. Now think about that for a second. He's not talking about better regulations or closing tax loopholes. He's talking about fundamentally changing the rules of the game so that becoming wealthy is no longer possible. That's not policy tweaking. That's revolution. And the crowd, they ate it up. You could hear the cheers echoing through the room as he promised a new age in America, one where government controls everything, where private property is suspect, where the promise that you can work hard and build something for yourself and your family is replaced with the promise that government will take care of all your problems, big and small. If you've lived through the Cold War, you've heard the song before. The melody might be a little different. The instruments might have changed, but the lyrics are hauntingly familiar. Here's what struck past me most, though. Zohran didn't just talk about policy. He talked about identity. He said New York would remain a city of immigrants built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and now, as of that night, led by an immigrant. And he was very deliberate with his words. He didn't say a city of Americans or a nation of citizens. He said immigrants over and over again. Now, I'm an immigrant myself. I came to this country because I believed in what it represented. Freedom, opportunity, the chance to build something that matters. But here's the thing. I didn't come here to stay. South African. I came here to become American. There's a difference, and it's not a small one. When you come to a new country and you refuse to assimilate, when you refuse to adopt the values and culture that made that place worth moving to in the first place, you're not immigrating, you're colonizing, you're bringing your old world with you and imposing it on your new home. And that's exactly what Zohran seems to be advocating for. He listed off all these different nationalities. Yemen bodega owners, Mexican grandmothers, Senegalese taxi drivers, Uzbek nurses, Trinidadian cooks, Ethiopian, Antis. And look, I love diversity as much as anyone. Different perspectives make us stronger. Different experiences spark innovation. But notice what's missing from that list. Americans. He never once acknowledged the people who were born here, who built the city over generations, who have deep roots in the community. It's like they don't exist in his vision of New York. That's not inclusion. That's replacement. And when you replace a common identity with a patchwork of separate tribal identities, you don't get a stronger society. You get a more fragmented one. You get people who live in the same city but inhabit completely different worlds with no shared language or values to hold them together. And here's where it gets really interesting. Within hours of that speech, Trump fired back 4 words, and so it begins. That's it. Short, blunt, ominous. And then he followed up by making it crystal clear that if Zohran tries to interfere with federal immigration enforcement, he'll have him arrested not as a political opponent, but as someone obstructing the law. Now, you might think that sounds extreme, but here's what Trump understands that a lot of people miss. This isn't just about one mayor in one city. It's about whether we're going to have a country with borders and laws that mean something, or whether we're going to let local politicians nullify federal authority whenever it suits their ideology. If a mayor can stand up and say, I don't care what the federal government says, I'm not going to let them enforce immigration law in my city, what's to stop another mayor from saying, I don't care what the federal government says, I'm not going to let them collect taxes here, or I'm not going to recognize federal court rulings. You see where this goes, right? You end up with chaos. You end up with a country that's a country in name only. But let's zoom out for a minute, because this story isn't just about Zohran or Trump. It's about something much bigger. It's about why someone like Zohran could win in the first place. And to understand that, we need to talk about economics. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of young people are struggling, and I mean really struggling. Not in the way every generation struggles when they're starting out. I'm talking about structural problems that make the American dream feel like a cruel joke. Right now, the median age of a first-time homebuyer in America is around 40 years old. 40. When I was young, people were buying their first homes in their mid-20s. They were starting families, building equity, planting roots. Now, people are stuck renting into middle age, watching housing prices climb faster than their wages, feeling like they're on a treadmill that keeps speeding up while they're just trying not to fall off. Student loan debt has exploded. We're talking about amounts in the range of 1.5 to 2 trillion nationally. And it's not just the total. That's scary. It's the default rate. Credit card delinquencies are spiking, too, hitting levels we haven't seen since the financial crisis over a decade ago. People are maxing out their cards just to cover basic expenses, then falling behind on payments, then getting buried under interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. And it's not because this generation is lazy or entitled. It's because the system has fundamentally changed. Wages haven't kept pace with the cost of living. Benefits have been stripped away. Job. Security is a relic of the past. The social contract that said, work hard, play by the rules, and you'll be able to build a decent life has been shredded. So, when someone like Zohran comes along and says, the system is rigged against you, and I'm going to tear it down and build something better, a lot of people listen. They're desperate. They're angry. They're looking for someone to blame and someone to save them. Now, here's where I think people are making a huge mistake. They're diagnosing the problem correctly, but prescribing the wrong cure. The problem isn't capitalism. The problem is that we've stopped practicing real capitalism. We've created this crony system where Big corporations lobby for regulations that protect them from competition, where banks get bailed out when they make stupid bets, where the well-connected get rich while everyone else fights for scraps. Real capitalism is about competition. It's about anyone with a good idea and the willingness to work hard, being able to start a business and succeed. It's about failure being a real possibility, which is what makes success meaningful. It's about government setting basic rules and then getting out of the way. What we have now, it's this weird hybrid where government picks winners and losers, where entire industries are protected from disruption, where the tax code is so complicated that only the wealthy can afford to hire lawyers to exploit it. That's not capitalism. That's something closer to feudalism. And here's the thing about the socialist solution that Zohran is selling. It doesn't fix any of that. It makes it worse. Because when you concentrate all the power in government, when you make government the solver of every problem, big and small, you don't eliminate corruption and cronyism. You just move out it. Instead of corporations lobbying for favorable regulations, you get bureaucrats deciding who gets resources and who doesn't. Instead of competing for customers, companies compete for political favor. And the ordinary person, they're even more powerless than before, because now there's no alternative. There's no option to start your own business and compete. The government is the only game in town. Look at Venezuela. 20 years ago, it was the richest country in South America. Oil wealth, natural resources, educated population. Then, they elected a socialist government that promised to redistribute wealth and create equality. You know what happened? Hyperinflation, food shortages, millions of people fleeing to neighboring countries. The economy didn't just shrink, it collapsed. And the people who suffered the most weren't the rich. They got their money out. It was the working class, the people the government claimed to be helping, who ended up starving. That's not a scare tactic. That's history. And if we forget history, we're doomed to repeat it. But here's what makes Rise even more concerning. There's money behind this. Big money. Serious. Influence. This isn't some grassroots movement that bubbled up organically from the streets of Brooklyn. Within minutes of Zohran's victory, Alex Soros, the son and heir to George Soros's massive political empire, posted a photo with Zohran celebrating the win and calling it the continuation of the American dream. Now, I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but when someone with access to billions of dollars in political funding is publicly celebrating a socialist victory and calling it a dream come true, you have to ask, what's the end game here? Because it's not about helping working people. People with that kind of wealth don't get excited about redistributing it. They get excited about reshaping systems in ways that benefit them. And that's what this is really about. It's about power, who has it, who wants it, and what they're willing to do to get it. Zohran talks about dismantling the system that allows people to accumulate wealth and power, but he's not talking about dismantling power itself. He's talking about redirecting it away from markets and individuals and into the hands of government, which means into his hands and the hands of people who think like him. That's not liberation. That's consolidation. Think about it this way. If you wanted to control a city, what would be the most effective way to do it? You could try to control every business, every transaction, every interaction, but that's exhausting and inefficient. Much easier to just control the government and then use the government to control everything else. That's what centralized power looks like. And that's what Zohran is building toward. And the scariest part, a lot of people are cheering for it because they're hurting, because they're desperate, because they've been sold a story that says their suffering is someone else's fault. And if we just punish the right people and redistribute the right resources, everything will be okay. But it won't. Because you can't build prosperity by tearing down the people who create it. You can't make everyone richer by making rich people poorer. Wealth isn't a pie where one person's slice means less for everyone else. Wealth is created, it grows, and it grows fastest when people are free to innovate, to take risks, to fail and try again. When you kill that freedom, you kill growth. And when growth stops, everyone suffers. Not equally, by the way. The people at the top, the government officials, the well-connected, elites, they'll be fine. It's everyone else who gets crushed. So when Zohran says there's no problem, too big or too small for government to solve, what he's really saying is trust us with everything. Give us control over every aspect of your life, and we promise we'll take care of you. But here's the question you should be asking. What happens when that government decides you're the problem? History gives us plenty of examples. In the Soviet Union, if you were too successful as a farmer, you were labeled a kulak and sent to a labor camp. In Ma China, if you were educated or owned property, you were declared an enemy of the people during the Cultural Revolution. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, wearing glasses was enough to get you killed because it meant you might be an intellectual. I'm not saying Zohran Mani is planning genocide. I'm saying that when you build a system where government has unlimited power to solve unlimited problems, you create the conditions where abuse becomes inevitable. Because power doesn't stay pure, it corrupts, and the people who seek that kind of power are rarely the ones you want having it. Let's think about this from a different angle. Imagine you're designing a computer system. You could create one central processor that handles everything, every calculation, every function, every decision. Sounds efficient, right? Single point of control. No confusion about who's in charge. But here's what happens. That single processor becomes a bottleneck. It can't handle the complexity of millions of simultaneous operations. It slows down. It makes errors. And when it fails, not if, but when the entire system crashes, everything stops working at once. That's why modern systems are decentralized, distributed processing, multiple nodes, making decisions independently, coordinating through protocols, but not controlled by any single authority. It's messier. It's less neat and tidy, but it's resilient. When one part fails, the rest keeps working. The system adapts and survives. That's what free markets are. Distributed decision millions of people making choices about what to buy, what to sell, what to invest in, what risks to take. No central planner can possibly have enough information to make all those decisions well, but a million individuals acting on their own knowledge and incentives can collectively solve problems that no bureaucracy ever could. When Zohran says government should solve every problem, he's arguing for that single processor model. He's saying trust us to know better than you what you need, what you should do, how you should live. And maybe he means well. Maybe he genuinely believes he's going to help people. But good intentions don't change the math. Centralized control fails. It always has. It always will. The question is, how much damage does it do before people realize it's not working? Now, while all this is playing out in New York, Trump is fighting his own battle over control and authority and is happening in the Supreme Court of all places. The issue, whether the president has the legal authority to impose sweeping tariffs on other countries without Congress approving every single one. This might sound like boring legal stuff, but it's actually critical. Because if the court rules that Trump overstepped his authority, it doesn't just affect tariffs. It affects the entire economic strategy his administration has been pursuing. The plan to bring manufacturing back to America, to reduce dependence on China, to rebuild the industrial base that we've been hollowing out for decades. All of that relies on being able to respond quickly to economic threats without waiting for Congress to debate and negotiate for months or years. The argument from the other side is about separation of powers. Congress is supposed to control trade policy. They say the president is overreaching. And, look, I understand that concern. Checks and balances matter. Limiting executive power matters. But here's the thing. Congress has already delegated a lot of this authority to the president through laws passed decades ago. The question isn't whether the president has power, it's whether Congress can take it back easily, or whether that power once given is hard to reclaim. One of the justices made a fascinating point during the oral arguments. He said, something like once Congress gives power to the president and the president signs that law giving himself more power, which, of course, every president will do. How? Does Congress ever get it back? You need a supermajority to override a veto. What? President is going to voluntarily give up authority. It's a ratchet effect. Power flows in one direction, and that's a problem, whether we're talking about economic policy or social policy or anything else, because concentrated power, even when it's used for goals you agree with, creates vulnerabilities. It creates opportunities for abuse. It makes the system fragile. The market odds right now suggests the court is leaning against Trump on this. Something in the range of 75-80% chance they rule that he exceeded his authority. If that happens, not only does Trump have to find new legal justification for his trade policies, but Treasury might have to refund hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs already collected. That's not pocket change. That's real money that could destabilize the entire federal budget. And here's where it connects. Back to Zohran. Both of them, in very different ways, are testing the limits of executive power. Trump is trying to reshape America's relationship with the rest of the world through trade policy. Zohran is trying to reshape America's largest city through ideological revolution. Both believe the old rules don't apply anymore. Both believe the situation is urgent enough to justify extraordinary measures. The difference is in what they're trying to build. Trump, whatever you think of his methods, is trying to strengthen American industry and American sovereignty. He's trying to make the country less dependent on rivals and more self-sufficient. Zohran is trying to tear down the structures that made America powerful in the first place. He's not trying to reform capitalism. He's trying to replace it. And the people of New York, they're about to find out what that replacement looks like. Because here's what happens when you elect someone who promises to dramatically raise taxes on the wealthy and on businesses. They leave. It's not a threat. It's not a negotiation tactic. It's just math. When the cost of operating in a place exceeds the benefit, you move. And the wealthy have options. They can live anywhere. They can move their businesses anywhere. They're not trapped. You know who is trapped? Working families, people with kids in local schools, people with aging parents who can't be uprooted, people with jobs that tie them to a specific location. They are the ones who are stuck when the tax base collapses. And city services get cut, and the whole infrastructure starts to crumble. We've seen this before. In the 1972 seconds, New York City nearly went bankrupt. Crime was out of control. Businesses were fleeing. The federal government had to step in to prevent total collapse. It took decades to recover. And now we might be watching the beginning of that cycle again. Some people will say, I'm being too pessimistic. They'll say, Zohran won't actually implement the radical policies he talked about in that victory speech. Politicians say extreme things on the campaign trail.